welcome to today's session. We're here with Christine from Ferraris Law, discussing important updates about tenant rights and the evolving landscape of landlord-tenant relationships. Let's dive right into our first question. So what are the essential rights tenants should be aware of when entering into a lease agreement?
Okay, good question, Lizette, and thank you for putting this together because landlord tenants are fraught with all kinds of, I guess, let's just say issues that, tenants aren't usually aware of when they're happening. And it's only after, there's a problem that they realize maybe, oh, I should have done something differently. So hopefully this will help folks who are, in a lease agreement and renting an apartment or a house. So when you're entering into a lease agreement, what I see these days is that there are leases, and a lot of the property management companies, they're huge. They're not just in one state now, they're big. So they have all these prescribed leases to try to make lots of money. And usually they do it by making charges, adding charges that you normally wouldn't expect to be part of a lease, like charging for a light bulb, charging for, the air conditioning screens. If they're dirty, maybe you replace those, right? But now what you see is that property managers or landlords are going into a rented residence and checking to see if the air conditioning unit screen is dirty. And even if it's dirty and if it hasn't been changed, like according to them, whatever's prescribed in the lease, and so you want to pay attention to that, then they'll charge you. And they're not going to just charge you for the actual price of the screening or whatever, the filter, that's what it's called, I'm sorry. They're going to charge you for the time it costs to hire that person to go out, and it could be $200 where it's just like a $10 filter. The other thing is at move out, what are the things they could potentially charge for? And even if your light bulb went out within the first month of your lease, you better make sure that light bulb, is fresh, or they're going to charge you not just $2 for a light bulb, what it might cost. They're going to charge you $10 or $15 potentially, whatever is in that lease. So pay attention to the lease and anything else that they put on there that, might be in the small print or in a document that they give you afterwards. And if you have questions about it, whether it's legitimate or not, you make sure you submit that in writing. So those are my essential tips, is really to understand, the extra charges that they can charge you and the move in and move out policy, because that's where a lot of charges, at least on the move out end, get assessed, because they say, oh, well, this is what it was like on move in. And if you show that, hey, the light fixture wasn't quite right, or the window screen wasn't on when I moved in, and you can't charge me for there not being a screen on the window when I leave. So these are the things you really want to pay attention to, because it can quickly escalate. What you thought was your security deposit, and that was going to be returned to you, can quickly become more than that. Even they might even charge you more than your security deposit, because it was in the lease.
Okay, so that actually answers my second question as well, because I wanted to ask, like, what essential tips do you have for or recommend for renters when evaluating a potential new home? What are the things that you should do, like when you decide, okay, listen, this house is to rent, I've agreed with the agent, we're going to meet at the house, and I'm taking this house. What are the things you can recommend?
Yeah. Use technology. You have a phone, it takes videos, it takes pictures. So videotaping, and especially if you find things that, like, you notice that you want corrected before you move in, or they promise that they're going to correct, document it. And that means take a picture or video, because I have seen with some property management companies, they are videotaping the move-in, but they're not going to videotape every single thing that, like, as if you were moving in, that you would want to maybe to show what was good and bad. They're going to say, well, nothing got pointed out. This was good. There was no issues raised. So make sure you take the time which you should be allocated under the landlord tenant rules to have time to inspect the house or apartment for any potential issues. That's what because that's what's going to be compared when you leave. So make sure all the lights work, make sure fixtures and things, look at the details. You know, was the stove clean? Was if things weren't clean and they expect you to, because now a lot of times, uh, homeowners or property managers, what have you, will expect it to be spick and span. And if it wasn't when you moved in, you want to make a note of that and say, hey, I'm having to pay someone to clean this, or I'm having to spend this time. Now, if they're a good landlord, they'll acknowledge that and maybe let you reduce the amount of rent or what have you, because they may be relying on somebody else to do the job for cleaning. They're not doing it themselves, obviously. So if it hasn't been done, you want to point that out. If there's painting that needs to be done, there's marked up walls. These are normally wear and tear types of things, but they're usually remedied for the next tenant. So it's just something that you want to be mindful of when you're document and then email. Unfortunately, a lot of the property management companies, like our law office, they're using these portal systems where you have to submit your question into a portal and things. But try to keep, whatever you're doing to communicate, try to keep a copy, right? So that you have a data. Sometimes you'll text message the property manager because it's easier for both sides, and a lot of people are using text messaging, and which is okay, but you want to make sure you can download that or keep records of your communication, so that, because everybody forgets, and it's best to have a folder of what the communications were, especially if you stay in a place for a couple of years. You're not going to remember exactly what was said when you moved in or what you said.
That is very, very true. I think also taking maybe screenshots of your messages between the two of you, between the landlord and tenant. And yeah, I think that's also important. And making sure when you document things, like maybe a video or a photo, that there's a timestamp on to tell you exactly when it was taken. So another question that I have was, what action can tenants take if they believe their rights are being violated?
Good, another good question. Usually getting in touch with a lawyer, but I will say a lot of legal aid organizations, which will have on their websites good information about landlord tenant laws. Generally speaking, there is going to be some kind of landlord tenant act that you can read through, and sometimes it's not always easy to interpret exactly what it means. Security deposits are a huge issue, and so there's usually a dedicated statute about that, about what can be withheld under your security deposit, and what and how their time frames, like for protesting, that somebody unfairly withheld the security deposit. You have usually short windows. You have to follow those to protect your rights. So I would say, contacting a legal aid, or even Googling. A lot of people are vocal. Sometimes you'll even see, I would check out, as something that just came to my head, check out the property management company. If you're dealing with a property management, see what the Google reviews are on them, or Yelp or whatever, because when people are, cheated somehow, they're going to get vocal about it. And so in anticipation, oh, well, maybe these guys aren't so good, and maybe I have to protect myself more, because sometimes you want a house, but you have to deal with that property management company, or you want that particular apartment because there's not a lot to come by. So just be aware of what other complaints are out there, and just protect yourself to the extent, of whatever is necessary under the law. I know in different states and things, there's a Landlord Tenant Act, and I would say nearly almost every state, because these came out in the 70s when there was lots of landlord abuses, and there still are. And especially you see them in places where there's university towns, and because students aren't always aware of their rights, but with the internet, we become more aware. And I suggest using that, because it can be a friend. Or contacting your neighbors if you're in an apartment complex, or if you're in some sort of community where is the same property management, maybe reaching out to neighbors to see if they've had any issues and how they've resolved it.
Yeah, that makes sense and is really helpful, especially if you want to rent a new place. Then the last question. What are some common misconceptions tenants have about their rights and responsibilities?
Misconceptions. I guess that I don't know about I guess misconceptions is that maybe the landlord is going to always be honest. That said, sometimes a tenant always isn't honest. So I guess just to understand that, just because someone said something doesn't mean it's going to happen. So you always should confirm something in writing. And this goes, across the board for anything. When you're in a relationship where you're expecting some give and take, we all remember things differently. And if you think that they said, oh, well, you won't have a cleaning fee, or as long as you clean it up when you move out, you're good, and expect to get the security deposit back. And then you find out that that's not the case because, there was something in the small print. So understanding that, verbal representations don't necessarily overcome what's in writing. They might say something that's, that they don't even know that's in, because they didn't draft the lease. These leases are often standard documents that sometimes aren't always clear and have lots of small writing in them. So making sure you understand what the lease says and not misinterpreting it, and then not relying on verbal representations, I guess, is two important things I would say people should take away from.
Okay, thank you so much, Christine, for these helpful insights. For more guidance, feel free to reach out to Ferraris Law for support with your tenant rights and any other legal questions you may have.